adults that are not their parents. So this is something that I would suggest looking at further down the road. Okay. Type of housing, about half of the farm workers we spoke to rented. A pretty high number, 43%, live in employer-provided housing, which is generally free, and only about not quite 3% own. In terms of rental costs, this is important as well in terms of looking at the demand for housing. We've seen that the demand is pretty inelastic, and farm workers generally, even if it's not if you build it, they will come kind of a thing, it's if you build it and it's considered affordable, they will come. So it's really important to be thinking about what people are paying and what's the going rate. We found people paying about $167 a month for unaccompanied workers, and accompanied workers reported an average of about $533 per household for the entire household. Crowding is also a big issue for farm workers. We found that slightly over half of the farm workers in our sample live in what the U.S. Census defines as crowded conditions. That's more than one person per room, and room is every room in the house. It's not just bedrooms, so it's all rooms except for a bathroom. So 51% live in what the census defines as crowded, and then 23% live in what the census defines as severely crowded conditions, and that's more than 1.5 people per room. Just to give you an idea of how this compares to general rates in Mendocino County, according to the U.S. Census, 3.4% of the general non-farm worker population live in crowded conditions, and another 3.2% live in severely crowded conditions. So the rates are much, much higher than the general population. We also asked about housing problems. About a fifth of the respondents reported housing problems, and the main problems that people reported were excessive noise or lack of privacy, difficulties getting repairs, and inability to pay rent due to housemates unable to pay their share. Again, because there's so much shared housing among farm workers, if one person can't come up with the rent, everyone in the house or apartment is in trouble. So that's an issue to think about. We also looked at competing basic needs. About 14% of the respondents reported spending less on food and or health care in order to pay for housing. Generally, people's first priority is to remain housed and not be evicted, and they'll forego food and health care, which are generally seen as more expendable. Much higher rate for respondents with children reporting that. And again, there's important health considerations when you see people making these trade-offs around housing, food, and health care. Transportation, again, is another issue that we looked at. About half of the farm workers in the sample own their own car, and the remainder either ride with others, walk, bike, variety of transportation options. People paying for transportation reported a mean transportation cost of $40 a week. And what we've seen from van pools in other parts of the state, general rates are about $25 to $30 a week. So we're guessing that this would be a pretty attractive option for farm workers. Again, with gas prices going up, things are going to go up commensurately. So the numbers will change, but I'm expecting that the relationship will remain pretty similar. And in that sense, I think a van pool will probably be an attractive option for farm workers. Also, what we're seeing is that winery workers are also eligible for van pool based on the eligibility criteria, so that would expand the scope of potential passengers. We also found that 14% of employers said that a lack of farm worker transportation interfered with their ability to get work done, so this is something that could potentially be a win-win for both employers and farm workers. And we found larger farms as more likely to report lack of transportation as a problem, especially during the harvest. So just a few recommendations that we elicited from the people that we spoke to. There's a need for additional farm worker housing. I don't think that probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, particularly for both families and seasonal workers. Recommendations included changes in zoning laws and fee structures to facilitate more on-farm housing. This is something that's very attractive to growers. It's a good way of attracting and retaining a farm labor force. People called for public subsidies to provide more on-farm housing, more labor camps and RV parks. And also, we're seeing a need to increase awareness of regulations allowing construction of on-farm housing for farm workers. Our sense is that some growers may not be aware of their ability to do that. And then finally, just conclusions, we're seeing a need for more farm worker housing for unaccompanied farm workers and families. As I mentioned before, housing costs would need to be competitive with what farm workers are paying now. Most farm workers are here to make money, to send money back to their families in Mexico or Central America, and they don't have a lot of elasticity in their ability or willingness to pay. Also, we're seeing grower interest in providing on-farm housing and a need for creative mechanisms to facilitate that. Also, as I mentioned, we're seeing a need for improved farm worker transportation, and I'm guessing, based on what we've seen, that a van pool charging about $5 a day or similar. We need to do some more research based on distances, but probably would be attractive for farm workers. And one other issue that we're seeing is that trends in increased wine grape acreage in Mendocino County has grown a lot, about 5,000 additional acres in wine grapes from 1987 to 2002, which is the last period that we have data for, which also point to increased demand for farm labor housing and transportation. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. So as was mentioned, this is a draft of our findings. We're very interested in your feedback on this, any ways that we could improve it to provide more useful information for the county.
Okay, questions at this point? Supervisor Delbar.
A couple of questions. One on the van pool, and I know Mr. Simmental's in the audience, and if I could bug him for a quick second. I know Fetzer did have their own van pool program in place for a while. How did that pan out? If you've got, I don't know how familiar you were with it when you were there, but if you have any thoughts on how that worked out. And it's been a while, I know.
Santiago Cimentel. Actually, it was a pretty successful program, and it continues today. And how it worked out, it was specifically for the production facilities itself, which is a bottling plant, where there was a large year-round group of employees who took up ownership of the vans themselves. And so at that point, the vans were no cost, but they took up ownership as related to maintenance and fuel costs. And so those who were members of each of those van pools would pitch in and participate in the cost for those vehicles and that transportation. But it's a good program. They did really well with it.
Okay, thank you.
If I could jump in, I have to apologize. I forgot to turn things over to Patrick Ford from the planning team, who's going to present some of the origin destination data that we collected. So if that's okay, I'll let Patrick present that.
That'd be all right. Supervisor Pinto, hold your question. Okay.
Hello, Board of Supervisors. I did the mapping.
Your name for the record.
Sorry, Patrick Ford, planning team. I did the mapping for our data that was received from the farm worker survey, with the goal of trying to find relationships between where the workers are and where the employment sites are. To explain the map up here a little bit better, I only shaded in green the areas with active cultivation. And showed a dot representation of just all farm workers with we're going to see in depth of in the various areas a little bit better, but this is a dot representation of where all of our responding workers are, and the color of the dots indicate, are they seasonal or are they full-time. The blue dots are full-time workers, and then the red represents seasonal employees. So now I'm going to actually go look at some of the areas that are commonly associated with grape production. Okay, the first area we looked at was the Anderson Valley, and we've identified the 2 farms that were participating in the survey, as well as the remainder of the cultivation area. The typical Anderson Valley full-time worker lives in the Anderson Valley. And they do receive seasonal help from workers that are based in the Ukiah Valley. Okay, this is a distribution of the Sunel Valley farm workers. More farms participated in the Sunel Valley area, and the workers from the Sunel Valley were actually, more of them were concentrated in the Ukiah Valley, even as far up to Redwood Valley, and this included both full